My name is Tish Harrison Warren. I am an Anglican priest. I am a writer. I'm a senior fellow with the Trinity Forum and wrote the introduction for Pilgrim at Tinker Creek. It's not a collection of poetry, but it is deeply poetic. The book is about our world. It's about nature. It's about attending to the small things around us, to seasons, to beauty. That's kind of the big idea. But what this book really does is just absolutely make a feast of language. At the end of the day, this book is about revealing the beauty that's all around us by sitting and learning from a poet. Actually, I think that beauty is so inseparable from truth that we actually don't fully get to the truth of things if we ignore facility with language, if we ignore the aesthetics of how something moves our soul. When we were talking about things of God, I actually do think that to value ideas over beauty and poetry and language, in the end, gives us a misshapen idea of what we believe as Christians and who we worship as Christians, because we don't worship ideas. We worship this wild and unpredictable being, divine being, who is unspeakably beautiful and who in the end woos our soul. Dillard she grew up in Pittsburgh in a fairly affluent and privileged place. From a really early age, was very spiritually interested. She would go and sit in the back of a church, all by herself, even, to listen as a kid. But then last time I checked her website, she says explicitly that she's quit the Catholic Church and Christianity. And she says, I stay near Christianity and Hasidism. I would probably not go to a church that if Annie Dillard was the pastor there. Can I say that? Annie Dillard and I are very different doctrinally, and I'm sure we disagree on a number of spiritual things. That said, she has taught me, in the words of Eugene Peterson, to pray with my eyes open. Like, she's taught me to notice God at work in the world in ways that I wouldn't. I don't think that I had been exposed to writing at that period in my life that was simultaneously so observant and honest about the world, but so luminous, so full of light at the same time. And so it was kind of a whole new world for me of words that could just be delicious, that a book that you just want to come to again and again, to just sort of like suck the marrow from it, that just kind of read a sentence and sit with it for a while. So it kind of introduced me into a new way of reading, not just reading for ideas or reading for a test or reading for a story to follow a storyline, but reading for the words themselves, reading as an act of learning to pay attention to the world around me. That is what this book gave me that I had never experienced before. And this introduced me to a new way of reading that opened me up to a new way of reading the world around me. And that is it completely, that changed my life. I mean, I do what I do today because of that. You know, when I struggle to believe the gospel, I read apologetics like N.T. Wright, The Resurrection of God, or C.S. Lewis, Mere Christianity. But when I really, really struggle to believe, I reach for Lucy Shaw. I reach for Scott Cairns. I reach for Annie Dillard. What they do is remind me, like, call me back to the reality of this kind of unsearchable, untamable, wild beauty of God. And there's something in that that calls me, that helps me believe in a way that's deeper, not disconnected from my mind or cognition or doctrine, but fused with it in such a way that I can't really have one without the other. I mean, beyond that, Annie Dillard just calls us back to an embodied world. And I think that is a particular gift of hers in this time where, with digitization, with new media, with new technology, our bodies, what we're told all the time through social media, through the mediums that we ingest, including Zoom, is that bodies don't matter, place doesn't matter, that all of that can be transcended, that the analog material world around us is somehow not as real as the sort of digital world and relationships that we have. And so this voice that kind of speaks from the past and reminds us of the need to pay attention to slow, embodied, growing analog things is just, I think, more important today than it was the day that Dillard wrote this. Like, she made something so beautiful that we're still talking about it and studying it. And at the same time, making this required lots of time where she just sat, where she went on walks, where she wrote in her journal. And then, of course, years and years of editing and revising and working really, really hard at this. But to see the world takes silence and solitude and time. But we need people that take that time, whether it's monks in a cell or artists in their studio, writers at their writing desk, so that the rest of us can learn, to live our own lives in a way that's more beautiful, more rich, and more observant, more full of kind of attention and devotion, I think is the right word for the lives that we live. It's people that take notice of God in the world and take notice of their own lives teach the rest of us how to take notice of God in the world and take notice of our own lives. If I were leading a discussion on this book, I would sort of read passages meditatively and just honestly write down what kind of strikes me. And some of that will be ideas. I mean, I think one of the great ideas of this book that I would hope people would pay attention to is the idea of seeing, the idea of the way we see. Her gorgeous, gorgeous stories about blind people receiving sight and the different reactions to that is one of my very favorite parts of the book. And I think in ways it frames the book, and that the whole book is about us learning to see, whether or not we're blind or not, that all of us sort of live with scales over our eyes. And so what does it mean to learn to see? What's it mean to live where theophany, like a sort of flaming vision of God, could pop out of anything at any time? But this book is also sort of it's never didactic at all. And so it's not going to be a book that we can sort of just look at as what are the ideas this is teaching, what's Annie Dillard trying to convey, because it like a piece of music or like a work of art, and the best visual art isn't overly didactic. It's an invitation to explore ideas, to explore emotions, to explore even the materials that were used in that, which for Dillard, the materials are words and nature, the earth, and the ways that those interact, and time, I would say. And so I think the challenge for this book for modern readers is going to be to slow down enough to sit with Dillard by the creek and notice the things that she notices along with her. I think that we tend to read really shallowly, especially if you're online a lot. I mean, everything trains you to more or less kind of skim for the ideas in something, or the vitriol in something, for the big emotions. And this book is just an absolute retraining in how to read, and that it requires someone to sit down, to pay attention to their own life, to pay attention to their own experience, and to pay attention to the words, to the poetry in a passage. And so you cannot read this book like you read a blog post. I would say you can't even read, I mean, as a New York Times writer, I would say you can't even read this book like you're reading the New York Times. It has to be more like a walk through an art museum. And the art is the world around us. The art is the everyday experience of human life in a planet that is fallen and violent, but also gorgeous and like just chocked to the brim with glory. That is the museum. And Dillard is teaching us to notice the artwork. I mean, she says this, her writing, she said, was so that creation does not play to an empty house. I think of Mary Carr, Marilyn Robinson, and Lucy Shaw, as I said, Scott Cairns. I think of Wendell Berry. I mean, so many of these people are poets that write prose. At the same time, I genuinely can't think of anyone that matches Annie Dillard. I mean, she's sort of in a class of her own. She won the Pulitzer Prize on her very first book. I mean, there are so many just gorgeous writers that write really beautifully, but I mean, she's the GOAT, as the kids would say.